Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to walk through the process on how do you integrate a jQuery plugin with AngularJS inside of SharePoint. So picking up where we left off, building out our homepage for the new job portal site, as we see here, this is the default design or the mock-up design from our design package. And here you see the carousel, which is the web part that we're actually going to build out today. Now, if we switch back over to SharePoint, for the web part, you saw that the carousel had slides and a login form. So that's pretty basic. And I have this custom list here called JP Slider that's going to give me 3 slides to play with. And it's really basic. It's just the title, the JP image, which is a publishing image column. We have the publish date, we have the publish end date, and then we have a flag to show or hide the search box. Now, to implement this, if we switch over to Visual Studio, let me just blow this up a little bit. And I've since our last video, I've since then integrated this with TFS using the Git repository, just so that we can be a little safe and have most of our project tied to source control. I can show, in the future, I can film a video on how that was done, but I don't want to waste this video to go through those details. Now, in order to do the slider, the first thing we need to do is create a slide template. So let's go back. So if we look at our style library, job portal, and look at all the templates, we have this slideshow template here. And basically that just came off of our design package looking at index.html. I just simply copy and paste, and I'll do this again now. Just copy and paste this. Slider starts here, HTML chunk, went here into the slideshow, and then let me just replace this, clear this out, and then paste this in. And that's just going to give us the standard markup that we needed. Now, I was testing with this to highlight or hide the search form, and I wanted to make sure that everything came in okay. So let me just uncomment this out, so that way each slide has a search form, which I think is a little bit extensive, but we have a flag to turn that on or off, so the content manager can control that. Now, the second piece we want to do is to make sure that our component, we want to create a component for this slider. And in order to create this component, what we do, we'll just go ahead and copy, let's say, blog post latest, an existing component, paste this here, and then just rename this guy to JP Slider. And that's going to be the name of our HTML tag. Now, within here, we have a couple of things that we will not be using, and one of them is the bindings. So let's just go ahead and remove that, and the comma that's needed to incorporate that. The other piece that we will keep is the image URL, and basically this is just going to give us the image path to the images directory that's stored in our style library. So if you're looking at your, let me collapse this. If you're looking at your project, that's going to be under the style library, the design, and then this images directory. We've already wired this up in the previous video. We're just reusing that and storing that into a local component variable called image URL. Now, obviously, because we copy and paste this is the service to bring in the blog post. We will be creating our own to bring in the sliders. So for right now, let's just comment this out, and we'll keep that as a placeholder. For the template URL, let's go ahead and update this to our template for the sliders, which is, we call it slideshow. Oop, I didn't mean to click on that. So let's just type that in here, slideshow.html. And that's going to point us to the slideshow HTML. Okay, and the last thing we want to do, so this is the JP slider. That's going to be the name of our HTML tag. And in the past, what we would have done, we would just go back here to our home page, go to the edit mode, and add in a script editor web part, and then drop in that tag, and then the slider should magically appear. I've actually struggled with this setup only because the slider and the way that the plugin is leveraged, it actually has to manipulate the DOM and then account for all the slides in a horizontal type fashion. and we will see this. Let me show you real quick how this is working. So if you do an inspect on this slider here and scroll up to the top to where they have a wrapper, you would notice that this width is really long. I mean, it's 12,000 pixels, right? 12,000 plus pixels. And basically what it's doing is adding up, based on the current viewport size and the width of each slide, is adding those together to come up with an external container that actually has a truncate on the other slide. So the illusion is that only one slide is shown at a time, and that is true, but behind the scenes, these are actually all layered horizontally. And the problem that we run into by using the script editor web part is that the JavaScript just cannot calculate the right DOM width for all of those slides, probably because of the structure of the web part and all this other good stuff. So after playing around with it and actually ripping this out and adding another plugin, because I thought this plugin was faulty and I thought the response design, something was off with that or overwriting it, I come to find out that it was a web part thing within SharePoint, so it was a SharePoint thing. And in order to get this to work, what we have to do is to drop in that slider snippet right here in the home page layout. So I'm going to do a JP slider snippet here, right above the rich text editor, right here in the home page layout. Now, the problem with this is that we removed the capabilities of the content manager to add in titles. One of the things that we did for the blog post was like the max count attribute and some other things to kind of control the slide. But what we're going to do is just shift that functionality from being like a web part property, where it used to be, into the actual JP slider list by giving them like an active flag or something along those lines. But for right now, we're going to drop this guy into the page layout. Let's go ahead and publish this up. And then what I would like to do is to go and publish up the slideshow and then also the component JS, and then push those up. And what we want to just confirm that the HTML of the slide as it exists is actually working as expected. So let's just go here, switch over to SharePoint, hit refresh. And right now we're not receiving anything. And part of that is because of the next issue that you have to worry about. And this is really what leveraging jQuery plugins with Angular, which is sometimes can be not as straightforward as we wish it could be. And if we look at the structure here in the style library in this JS file, there on JS folder, there's an internal.js file. And if you come up here and you take a look at this internal.js file, you will notice that there are plugin activations or plugin initializing code. So for the testimonials chunk, here's the jCarousel, which is the plugin that we're using. It set up the different options for this carousel, and then it actually executed or activated here. The problem is that I've been copy and pasting this so many times that I'm actually missing this slider, the slider one. So let's go to design, our design package, and let's go to the internal JS. Let me copy all of this really quick. Sorry about that. Let me copy this really quick and paste this in. So select all, let me delete this and then paste this in. So this is going to give us everything that we need as it was created by the designer and given to us in our design package. So this chunk of code right here, and this is standard jQuery plugin stuff. So obviously there's 1,000,001 plugins out there, and each one of them have their own like syntax or way of activating things or initializing things. And this is just an example of how the jCarousel does that. And the problem, so we're going to explain to you the issue that you run into and the adjustments that you need in order to overcome them, especially when using the jQuery plugins with Angular. And this is really an Angular thing and not really a SharePoint thing. SharePoint is only an equation because we're doing all of this in SharePoint. If this was like a standard Angular app and you were leveraging jQuery plugins, you would run into something very similar. The jQuery plugin by default, just because of the way jQuery works, is looking at this document ready event, which once this is fired, everything within these curly braces are executed. And the document ready and the reason why this event is important because it says, okay, the DOM is set. Go ahead and activate or initialize any other plugins that are required. So in our scenario, it's the carousel, and it's looking for the slideshow CSS class. So what we need to do in Angular is that because we drop all of that HTML for the slider inside of a Angular template file, that HTML file that we're leveraging, this HTML does not get seeded or may not be ready when the DOM is ready. So this may come after the DOM ready event is executed. So what's happening is that we're trying to initialize all of this HTML or this slide HTML CSS before the DOM is actually updated with this HTML. So in order to have more control of that, because our component is the one that shoots the HTML into or injects the HTML into the DOM, we actually need to call it here, right here within the component. So it's not hard to do. It's really a copy and paste. But to have more control over it, because we don't want this slide carousel being initialized when this controller function is hit. We actually want to have more control over that. So let's just say activate slider. Let's call this a function. And then we'll just wrap this initializer inside of this function here. Okay, so now we have more control over when it's called. And we want to call this guy right now, just to kind of show. Let me just move this. It's just a little stickler I have where I would like to have all internal functions at the bottom. So this onInit, we're going to call this eventually when we actually pull these fresh using the SharePoint REST API. But for now, let's just leave this commented out. And I'm going to use this. I have a copy of it here. This code snippet, only because I don't want to sit here while you watch me type and potentially get things wrong. The set timeout. So the way that we get past the Angular delay, right, because of the templates in a separate file, there's actually an AJAX call that go and get this template, gets the HTML, and then the controller tells it what to do and injects it into the DOM. We're still going to give it 700 milliseconds for that process to finish, and then we will call this activate slider. I have the wrong function calling here. So then we'll call this activate slider function, which would then initialize this. So if all is well, I should be able to push this components.js file up with my wrapper and my delay timer. And okay, so it actually popped in. Right now, the issue that we're running into now is that I have slides, and you see this thing is rotating, but I don't have the image because my image path is off. So let's go ahead and fix that. So now if I go back to my slideshow, all my image paths have this broken relative path, and we fixed this before in the previous blog. In the previous video. So really, we just have we just call this vm.image URL, and this is just a component local variable that's going to dynamically grab the image path for this particular site collection, which is the reason why it's dynamic, because we're grabbing it for this particular site collection. Else, if this was just a standard website where site collections didn't have to be considered, we can play around with the relative path like .. / whatever to get this relative for this current site collection. But in our scenario, that will only work if it's the root site collection. So let me copy this and go ahead and paste this into everywhere an image tag is used in this slider. And don't forget your ng source, because that ng source, because we're using the Angular token notation, the ng source is what's going to, again, load that at the right time based on the refresh cycle. So let's go ahead and publish this up. And hopefully at this time, we should be able to get images. All right, and there we have it. So we have images. I'm just trying to move my cursor out the way. And this thing is sliding as expected. And if we squeeze it, it should be responsive design as expected. It's still sliding. Yep. So this is looking exactly where we need it to be. Okay. So now what we wanted to do, this is all fine, right? And this is how, we approach these type of scenarios. The first thing we want to do is to make sure that we have the raw HTML from the design package working correctly within SharePoint. Once we have that piece together, then we would go after start to pull in the dynamic content from the SharePoint list and or library in order to hydrate this this carousel. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and switch over back to our JP slider, and this is the name of our JP slider is going to be the name of our list. And we have a lot of reusable code now that we I did something. Okay, so now that we have done this several times already, we should be able to come in here into our Angular services layer and just copy one of these guys to get most of what we need done, and then and then just update what we need to update. So what I'm gonna copy the get blog post, and then just paste this here. Just go ahead and rename this to get sliders. And this is going to pass in a max count. Are we going to do? No, we're not going to do a max count because, again, remember, we have to put our tag inside of the. We had to put our tag inside of the. Did I screw something up? We had to put our tag inside of the home page layout. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank. That green squiggly was throwing me off. Okay. I always do that, by the way. I always do the property name with parentheses to represent the function, but that was a syntax error. So this max count, this piece right here doesn't apply. So let's just remove that. And then we have our site collection prefix, which is good. And by title, and our list name is JP Slider. And everything else, as far as like the publish date, we can order by that, but that really is not the ordering. Maybe we can go out there and create another column for ordering, so that way the content manager can control which order the slides appear. This max count is not going to apply because that parameter is no longer being passed in. What else? And then as far as this get SP list item, this is a nice reusable data function or data service that once you just pass in the endpoint, it knows how to get that. It knows where to start in the JSON. So we can blindly just go ahead and set that to our local collection variable. Because we are using the publishing image, this JP image publishing site column, we would still leverage this method. And then that would just, again, we're stripping that image tag all the way down to the source attribute. And this is just going to pass in the raw URL, which give us a lot of flexibility to specify the rendition ID. So by doing all of that and adding in this double quotes there, so everything is valid, we actually are ready to go. So we have this get slider. Let's copy this, go to our component. And in our component, let's go ahead and activate this line of code that we commented out. Instead of saying get blog post, let's just paste that in and say get slider. We're not passing the max count again, so let's remove that. Let's just call this S, our local variable S, to represent slides. And that's going to pass that through the items collection. And again, because we did that second internal nested call, all of the URLs for these items for the images would be part of the image URL attribute. I'm sorry, property name. Now, we have our set timeout called here, but we have our AJAX call here, and then it doesn't get hydrated until the then method is actually executed. So let me just save this off, but eventually we're going to have to move this down. And but we'll circle back. We just want to see what the results are and talk through it. So let's switch back over to our slideshow. And all of this HTML right here at the item tag, let's collapse all of these. All of this HTML is all placeholder mock-up stuff. So let's comment those out. And in this item, this is where we want to put our ng repeat. an item in vm.items. Again, I always tend to use the same name for my collections, regardless of the types that they're holding. It just opens you up for copy and pasting. So now we have this detailed slide. Let's tackle this later. The one thing I do want to do, I want to see the real image as it's stored in the custom list. So let's just use our token item.image URL. And again, that image URL is coming from, if you go to the services layer, this guy here. And we just make it up, right? It can be anything. You can call it slide image URL or whatever you want to call it. But that's going to be the relative path to the image source without any other decorations on it. So we have full control of how we want that to display. All right, let's go ahead and push this up and see where we land. Let's go ahead and select all three of these guys and publish. Now, hopefully, if everything's wired up correctly, we should see these three in our carousel. And let's go here, hit refresh. And just like magic, everything is there. Right? So those are the three images. And again, you see how they kind of fluctuate in size. Let me shrink this down a little bit. Oh, that's interesting. So hold on, let me squeeze this browser a little bit. All right, so it's still responsive. And as you see, as this thing slides through, you will notice that this image seems to have a larger height than the other one. This image seems to be okay. It's stretching out wide. And this image seems to be okay to stretch out wide. So now we go back to our trusty rendition ID, right? So go to the site settings, image renditions. And I've already set this up. And basically, I went through the design package, right? Right-clicked on this guy, hit inspect, because I need to know which dimensions to set this to. And I highlight, interesting. I highlighted this image tag, and the natural image is 1920 by 720, but the current image, because the viewport is shrunken, is 1315 by 493. Again, the size, and this is going to change, right? The more that I squeeze this, how it's just going to resize that. That's what the Al plugin or carousel does. It's going to squeeze this to make it fit and make sure everything is uniform. But what I want to go after, its natural size, which is the 1920, 720. And I actually have this wrong here. So let's go ahead and modify this guy and use 1920 by 720 and save this all. And this rendition ID is going to be 8. So what I want to do is go back into our template, and within the URL, just put in the query string parameter rendition ID equals 8. Go ahead and publish this up. And when you publish it up, it automatically saves it and all this other good stuff. So you can do a few things with more things with fewer clicks. Okay, so now this guy, before the image rendition, was higher, and now everything is uniform and filling up the box as expected. Okay, so we got this working, but there's a couple of things that we probably want to do. The first one is that we don't want this search box to show for each and every slide. We actually want the content manager to control that. So if you recall, if we go back to our JP slider list, let's take a look at the settings. For this particular column here, the show search box, let me just click on this, and this is the internal name. So for the show search box, it has to be yes in order to display the form. So if we were back here in the template where it says slider details, that's the form section there. So let's put an ngIf here. And for item, which is our local variable for each item in the collection, if it's JP show, then show this, else hide it. And really, that's all we need to do. So let's just publish this up and confirm this is working as expected. And if I go to the home page, hit refresh, that's great. So it's missing for the first slide, and it's there for the second slide, and it's missing for the third slide. And if let me just put this into a second tab, and if I look at the JP slide list, that should be the case. Yes, so we have no, yes for the middle, and no for the bottom. So let's edit this and let's turn it on for all three again. Just a little unit testing here. And then we go back, hit refresh, and let's see where we are. Okay, so it's good there. It's there, it's there. Okay, so that looks like that's working as expected. Let's leave it on for the last one, turn it off for the other two. And hit refresh. And we should have it's on, off, on. That's weird. Oh, it didn't update. Hold on. There we go. You have to click out of the row. I thought you had to click out of the cell, but you have to click out of the row. So let's go ahead and hit refresh. And we have off, off, on. Okay, so that flag seems to be working as expected. So now what the users can do, the content manager can do, they can just go in here and control that. Okay, so another thing that we talked about a couple of things like setting the ordering and setting the an active flag and all this other good stuff. So what we're going to do, we're not going to do all of those, but I do want to show you the active flag. So let me get rid of all this noise, anything that we commented out. Let's get rid of all this noise. So because you only need one instance. The ng repeat drops in all the other instances that are required. So let's do this. Let's do an ng if set this equal to item dot JP is active. Okay. And this is a site column that doesn't exist yet, but we need to create it. So let's save this off and push this up. And basically, if the active flag is set, then the carousel should show that slide. So let's hit refresh, and it should be empty right now because we don't have that flag. So let's just go ahead and create it. And again, if you have a really good model, this type of maintenance should be pretty straightforward. So what I'm going to do, let's go to the site collection level. Oops, I clicked on the wrong one. Site columns, and hit create. And again, we call it JP is active. And we're going to make this a yes and no field, right? So for Boolean. And we want to make sure that we drop this into our custom group. And the default is yes. And then we hit OK. Now, you notice that I with the internal name, I'm going super generic. I'm at the site collection level. I'm not worried about the display name for the site column because I want to leave that up to the liberty of the site owner when they're leveraging these for their particular list and libraries. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead to the JP slider. Let's go ahead and add this in. And filter this down to the JP portal. And then let's go ahead, it's active, and hit OK. Now, I can get fancy here, right? I can come up here and say, is slide active, right? Just to make it more contextual for this particular feature. But my internal name is going to remain intact, so we're good to go there. So now this guy is set. By default, they're not going to have a value, but it defaults to yes. Let's explicitly make this yes. And just grab it by the corner and drag it down, populate everything else. Okay, so now if I come back here, hit refresh, now everything is active. So now if I come back and turn one of these off, let's turn off the one with the pretty trees in the back, hit refresh, I should only be down to 2, right? So now this gives them more control because we took away the max count. So now if they only want certain ones to be displayed, we have an is active flag to help control that. All right, so that's that. And the last piece is, this is the one thing that we talked about, and this is going to be more so a safety net. If we go back into the component, we talked about this set timeout that's going to display or activate the slider on 700 milliseconds. And we talked about the DOM, making sure that the DOM is ready and all this other good stuff. So right now this sits outside of our AJAX call, and this call right here is the one that puts in the number of slides there. So if this is slower than 700 milliseconds, then what will happen is that, again, we have a scenario where this will be activated or initialized, but all of the DOM or elements or the content is not ready. It's not there yet. So what we can do, let's just move this to be safe inside of this AJAX call here, and now we're still somewhat satisfied with the AJAX calls here. So now we know we have the data. We'll give it 700 milliseconds to get hydrated into the template, which is nothing. I mean, that usually should happen within 50 to 60 milliseconds. So 700 should give us enough headroom, and then we're good to go. Now, in another video, because we have this Carousel used in other areas, I will actually walk you through in the template, because there still may be a delay with the ng repeat. It shouldn't, right? It should not be that scenario. But I think a more common thing is that right now we're blindly waiting 700 milliseconds. But what if we want this to be loaded as soon as possible? Like as soon as the last slide is added to the DOM, go ahead and initialize the slider. That would be ideal, and that way we're not guessing on how many milliseconds we should wait before the DOM is loaded. And in another video, what I would do, there is the special indexes or special properties on the ng repeat. I think it's $first, $index, and $last. And index would be the count for the current item. Last is the last one in the count, and then $first would be the first one in the count or the collection. So what we want to do, we want to manipulate those elements, those properties within ng repeat, to know when the last slide is actually displayed based on what's in the collection, and then go off and call our jQuery plugin to be initialized. Again, this is a common issue, and once you get some tips and techniques on how to manage that and how to overcome those, you will find yourself reusing those in many different scenarios where you're integrating both plugins and Angular together. And again, that's not a SharePoint thing. That's just one of those things that we just happen to be hosting in SharePoint. Now, we saw how easy it was, and I just want to reiterate the point of, if you have a nice reusable set of functions to where you're not recreating some logic, and to where you're centralizing a lot of business logic and reusing that, it really makes this development pretty straightforward and actually relatively quick, right? So, and again, the scenarios we walk through are, how can we do this using SharePoint out-of-the-box REST API, whereas soon we're going to encounter how can we do something very similar using a custom REST API, because there's a lot of composition or caching or maybe additional business logic that we need to do, and we just want to encapsulate that type of stuff and not actually have this readily available within JavaScript, right? So some of those things you kind of want to hide, especially if you're doing public facing sites. You want to be very guarded with how much business logic and manipulation you do right here in the JavaScript file, and make sure you encapsulate and hide those away in a custom service or something along those lines. All right, well, that's it for this video. Again, this is how you can take a jQuery plugin with AngularJS, dealing with the timing issue with the DOM, and getting a nice, cool carousel loaded in SharePoint. And we also talked about, some of the flags or capabilities that we can put on those custom SharePoint lists to give the content manager a lot of flexibility and capability with manipulating these slides. Okay, that's it for this video, and I'll catch you in the next one, and take care.